The sun had barely risen over the quiet town of Willow Creek, yet there was already a sense of anticipation in the crisp morning air. Birds chirped softly as if they, too, were part of the day's unfolding story. In a small house at the end of Maple Street, a young woman named Emily stood by her window, staring at the horizon. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of hope and fear. She had always been someone who believed in possibilities, yet life had a way of testing even the strongest faith. Emily had grown up hearing the words "nothing is impossible" from her grandmother, a woman whose spirit was as unyielding as the mountains. Her grandmother would tell her stories of people who had achieved what others deemed unthinkable. Sometimes it was inventors who changed the world with strange machines. Other times it was athletes who ran faster, jumped higher, or climbed peaks that seemed untouchable. But Emily had learned early that believing was one thing, acting was another entirely. For years, she had dreamed of opening a small bakery in the heart of Willow Creek. She imagined the smell of fresh bread drifting through the streets, people smiling as they tasted her creations, children pressing their noses against the glass to look at the colorful pastries. Yet, every time she thought about taking the leap, doubts crept in. Money was tight, and people around her suggested she focus on a safer path. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was meant for more. That life had something extraordinary waiting for her just beyond the horizon. One chilly morning, while sipping a steaming cup of coffee, Emily noticed a flyer pinned to a community board outside the grocery store. It was faded and slightly torn, but the words stood out: Local Entrepreneur Workshop, learn to make your dream a reality. Her heart raced. She had never attended a workshop like this, and the idea of sitting among strangers filled her with nervous energy. But the flyer seemed to call to her, whispering that this could be the sign she had been waiting for. That evening, she walked into the community center, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a notebook. The room was filled with people of all ages, each with their own dreams and fears, each carrying stories that no one else could fully understand. A tall man with kind eyes introduced himself as the facilitator. He spoke of stories where impossible dreams had become reality, where ordinary people had achieved extraordinary things through persistence and courage. His words resonated with Emily. They ignited a spark that had been buried under years of hesitation. Over the next few weeks, Emily threw herself into the workshop with a passion she had never known. She learned about planning, budgeting, and marketing. She listened to stories of failure, realizing that each failure was not a defeat but a stepping stone. She discovered that the people who succeeded were not necessarily the most talented, but those who refused to give up, who saw every obstacle as an opportunity to grow. Slowly, Emily began to believe that her dream was not just a fantasy but a real possibility. One day, as she walked home from the workshop, she passed the old bakery that had been closed for years. The windows were dusty, and the sign was barely legible, but Emily saw potential. She imagined the walls painted in warm colors, the counters polished and gleaming, the aroma of fresh pastries welcoming everyone who entered. It was a vision that made her heart pound with excitement. She knew this was the place where her dream could take root. But dreams rarely come without challenges. Emily faced skepticism from friends and family. She had to navigate permits, inspections, and a mountain of paperwork that seemed impossible to conquer. There were days when she felt like giving up, when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush her spirit. Yet, every time doubt crept in, she remembered her grandmother's words. Nothing is impossible. Those words became a mantra, a lifeline that guided her through the darkest moments. She began working long hours, learning everything she could about baking, experimenting with recipes late into the night. Her kitchen became a laboratory of flavors, filled with the scent of vanilla, cinnamon, and fresh bread. Each failure taught her something new. When a cake didn't rise or a pastry fell flat, she didn't see it as defeat. She saw it as a lesson, a puzzle to solve. And slowly, the impossible began to feel achievable. The day finally arrived when Emily opened the doors to her bakery. She had worked tirelessly, pouring every ounce of energy, every bit of hope, into making it perfect. The first customers walked in hesitantly, curious about the small bakery that seemed to have sprung from dreams alone. Their smiles as they tasted her creations were worth more than anything else. The walls echoed with laughter and chatter. The counters were soon lined with people eager to experience the magic Emily had created. As she looked around, Emily realized that she had done more than just open a bakery. She had proven to herself that limits existed only in the mind, that determination could transform dreams into reality. She remembered the long nights of doubt, the paperwork, the skepticism of others, and she smiled. Nothing, truly nothing, was impossible when courage met persistence. Her story spread throughout Willow Creek. People were inspired not just by her pastries, but by her journey. Emily began mentoring others, sharing her experiences with those who dared to dream. She became a living example that the impossible is only impossible until someone dares to try. And as she closed the bakery each evening, watching the sun set behind the mountains, she felt a profound gratitude for every challenge, every moment of fear, and every step of the journey that had led her here. Emily's journey reminds us that life will test us in ways we cannot predict. Challenges will rise, doubts will whisper, and sometimes the world may seem determined to convince us that our dreams are beyond reach. Yet, the human spirit has a resilience that defies limits. Every great achievement starts with a single step, with a choice to believe, to act, and to refuse surrender. Nothing is impossible because the only true limits exist in our willingness to try. Emily woke the next morning with a sense of purpose she had never felt before. The bakery was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of dawn as sunlight filtered through the dusty windows. She moved through the small space with careful attention, brushing away forgotten crumbs, arranging jars of flour and sugar with precision, and wiping the counters until they gleamed. Every movement felt deliberate, as though the room itself could sense the energy she carried. She understood, more than ever, that building a dream was more than just action, it was a form of devotion. She began experimenting with recipes that had once seemed too difficult, those that required skills she thought she lacked. Croissants with layers that flaked perfectly, breads infused with herbs and spices that filled the room with intoxicating aroma. Tarts topped with fruit so fresh they seemed to glow. She worked late into the night, illuminated by the soft glow of the kitchen lights, learning the subtle language of dough, sugar, and heat. Each failure was a conversation with herself, a way to understand what she could do better, a reminder that persistence was the key to transformation. Days turned into weeks, and Emily noticed something remarkable happening within her. The fear that had once felt like a weight pressing on her chest began to dissolve. Each small success, each smile from a satisfied customer, reminded her that progress was not always measured by monumental achievements, but by the quiet victories that accumulate over time. She began to see obstacles not as roadblocks, but as invitations to grow. A burnt loaf was not a defeat, it was a lesson about timing. A tart that fell apart was not a failure, it was a discovery about balance and technique. One afternoon, a young boy named Liam entered the bakery with his mother. His eyes were wide with curiosity, and Emily noticed the way he hesitated at the counter, unsure if he was allowed to touch the pastries. She knelt down to speak with him, and he confided that he had never tasted fresh bread like this before. The look of wonder on his face as he bit into a warm croissant stayed with Emily long after he and his mother had left. It reminded her why she had started this journey. Why the long nights and moments of doubt had been worth every sacrifice. The impossible had become tangible, and it existed in that simple moment of joy. Word of Emily's bakery began to spread beyond Willow Creek. People from neighboring towns came to taste her creations, and her little shop became a hub of laughter, conversation, and community. Each visitor carried stories of their own challenges and dreams, and Emily found herself inspired by their courage. She realized that the journey of one person could ripple outward, touching countless lives. She started hosting small gatherings in the bakery, inviting locals to share their experiences, their fears, and their victories. Every story became a testament to the truth she had embraced, that nothing is impossible when the human spirit refuses to yield. Yet, Emily knew that sustaining her dream required more than passion. There were moments when financial pressures pressed down, when the demands of running a business threatened to overwhelm her. There were times when she felt alone, as though the weight of responsibility rested solely on her shoulders. But in those moments, she would pause, take a deep breath, and remember the countless stories she had heard in workshops, the lessons she had learned from those who had walked impossible paths before her. She remembered that fear was not a signal to stop, but a sign that she was moving in the right direction. One particularly challenging day, a storm rolled through Willow Creek, drenching the streets and cutting off power to the town. Emily had just received an urgent call from a supplier, informing her that an essential delivery would be delayed. She felt panic rising, a familiar companion in her journey. Yet, as she looked around her empty bakery, she realized that all her skills, all her persistence, and all her creativity were tools she could use to face this challenge. She lit candles, adjusted ovens to work without electricity as best she could, and improvised with ingredients already on hand. By the end of the day, despite the storm and setbacks, the bakery had not only survived, it had thrived. She had adapted, innovated, and proved once again that limits existed only in the mind. Emily's story continued to unfold, each chapter richer than the last. She began mentoring aspiring bakers and entrepreneurs, sharing not only her recipes but her philosophy of persistence and courage. She spoke of the nights when nothing seemed to go right, and the mornings when a small victory made all the difference. She emphasized that success was not a straight line, that setbacks were as essential as triumphs, and that belief in oneself was the most powerful ingredient of all. As she walked through the town one evening, she noticed a mural painted on the side of the community center. It depicted a figure climbing a mountain, reaching toward a sky filled with stars. Beneath it, in bold letters, were the words her grandmother had once spoken, "Nothing is impossible." Emily smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection to everyone who had dared to dream, to persevere, and to act despite fear. The mural was not just art, it was a symbol of the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that the boundaries we perceive are often illusions waiting to be shattered. Her journey was not without personal reflection. Emily spent hours contemplating the meaning of her success, realizing that true accomplishment was measured not in wealth or recognition, but in the courage to pursue a vision when everything seemed uncertain. She understood that fear and doubt were natural, but they could never be stronger than determination and belief. Every loaf of bread, every pastry, every smile from a customer reinforced the truth she had discovered, that nothing, truly nothing, is impossible when courage is paired with action. Emily's bakery became a symbol of hope for Willow Creek. It reminded people that dreams are alive, that effort and persistence can transform life in ways unimaginable. She had created more than a business, she had cultivated a space where possibility thrived, where stories of perseverance were celebrated, and where the impossible felt within reach of anyone willing to try. As the seasons changed, Emily's bakery became a living heartbeat of Willow Creek. The air was often thick with the aroma of fresh bread, spices, and sweetness, drawing people from near and far. The town streets, once quiet and unremarkable, now hummed with life. Children ran toward the bakery with excited shouts, elders lingered over coffee and pastries, and families made it a ritual to gather under its warm glow. Emily watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and humility. She realized that a dream she had once thought fragile had grown into something far greater than herself. One morning, a woman named Margaret came to the bakery. She was reserved, her hands clutching a worn leather bag, her eyes carrying a quiet sadness. Emily greeted her with her usual warmth, offering a cinnamon roll that was still warm from the oven. Margaret hesitated at first, then smiled as she tasted it. She spoke softly, sharing a story of her own long-suppressed dream to start a small art studio. Life had thrown countless obstacles her way, and she had almost given up. Yet, seeing Emily's bakery, thriving against all odds, sparked something within her. Emily listened, nodding gently, and shared her own journey, the late nights, the uncertainty, the fear that had threatened to paralyze her at every step. By the end of their conversation, Margaret's eyes shone with a new light. She left the bakery with renewed determination, inspired to take her first step toward opening her art studio. Emily realized then that the true impact of her work was not only in pastries and bread but in the courage she had inspired in others. The impossible was no longer a distant idea, it was a living truth that could ripple outward, touching lives in ways she could never fully predict. Days turned into months, and Emily continued to refine her craft, always experimenting, always learning. She discovered the joy of creating something new, whether it was a delicate tart with flavors that danced on the tongue or a rustic loaf that filled the room with warmth. She poured her heart into every detail, understanding that excellence was born from care, attention, and the relentless pursuit of improvement. Each creation became a symbol of perseverance, a tangible representation of what could happen when one refused to surrender to doubt. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Willow Creek, Emily stood outside her bakery and watched the townspeople pass by. She saw a young boy helping his mother carry a basket of pastries home, an elderly couple laughing as they shared a slice of pie, a group of teenagers leaning on the counter, exchanging stories and jokes. Each face reflected life in motion, the rhythm of ordinary moments made extraordinary through connection, courage, and hope. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, understanding that her journey had become a shared experience, a tapestry woven from countless dreams, struggles, and triumphs. Emily often thought back to her grandmother's words, spoken with quiet certainty years before, "Nothing is impossible." She realized now that those words were not just advice, they were a philosophy, a guide for life. Life would always present challenges, moments when fear whispered louder than hope, moments when doubt seemed insurmountable. But within each person existed a reservoir of strength, resilience, and creativity waiting to be tapped. The key was not avoiding fear or pretending it did not exist, but moving forward despite it. The bakery had become a classroom in itself. Local residents came seeking guidance, sharing their own ambitions, and Emily found joy in mentoring them. She spoke of failure not as a final destination but as a necessary companion on the path to success. She encouraged them to take risks, to embrace uncertainty, and to trust in their own capacity for growth. In teaching others, she discovered a deeper understanding of her own journey. She realized that the impossible was not a fixed boundary, but a horizon that receded as determination and action moved forward. One snowy morning, as flakes drifted lazily from the sky, Emily received a letter from a nearby town. It was from a school teacher who had heard of her story and wanted to bring her in to speak to a group of students. Emily felt a mix of excitement and nerves as she entered the school auditorium. The children stared at her with wide eyes, their curiosity shining brightly. She told them about her bakery, about the nights she doubted herself, the moments she had feared failure, and the joy she felt when she finally took a step forward. She spoke not just of baking, but of courage, persistence, and the power of believing in oneself. Afterward, the children crowded around her, full of questions and energy. Some wanted to know how to start their own projects, others asked how to face fear, and a few simply wanted to hear stories of her mistakes and how she overcame them. Emily answered with patience and honesty, sharing her experiences in a way that was accessible and inspiring. She realized that the seeds of possibility could be planted at any age, that curiosity and courage were universal forces capable of transforming lives. As years passed, Emily's bakery continued to thrive, but her greatest reward was not the growing list of customers or accolades. It was the lives she touched, the dreams she helped nurture, and the community that had formed around shared stories of courage and perseverance. She understood that success was not measured in wealth or fame, but in the capacity to inspire, to uplift, and to demonstrate that nothing is impossible. Late one evening, after the last customer had left and the ovens had cooled, Emily sat by the window, reflecting on her journey. She thought of every doubt, every setback, and every triumph. She remembered the flyer that had brought her to the workshop, the closed bakery that had seemed impossible to transform, and the countless nights when she had questioned her own abilities. And she smiled, understanding that the impossible had been an illusion all along, a challenge meant to test her resolve, a horizon meant to be crossed by those brave enough to try. She leaned back, sipping a warm cup of tea, and felt a profound peace. The bakery had become more than a dream, it had become a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And as she looked out at the town she loved, she whispered to herself, and to anyone willing to listen, nothing is impossible. Her story became a legend in Willow Creek, not because of her baking skills alone, but because of her courage, resilience, and the unwavering belief that dreams could be realized. Emily had transformed her life through determination, turning obstacles into opportunities and fear into fuel. And in doing so, she reminded everyone around her that the boundaries we perceive are often self-imposed, and the only true limit is the willingness to try. And so, as the night fell over Willow Creek, with stars sparkling in the vast sky above, Emily's bakery remained a beacon of hope and possibility. Her journey was a living testament to the truth that has guided dreamers through the ages: when courage meets persistence, when passion drives action, when belief refuses to falter, nothing, truly nothing, is impossible. I share stories like this every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.